Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Henry Madoff, the chair of the master's program in curatorial practice here at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And each week, it's my pleasure to do the curatorial roundtable with a distinguished curator or institutional director. And today, which is, by the way, the last session of the curatorial roundtable for this semester. And in 2 weeks, on October 28th, the Artist Roundtable begins, hosted by Tamsin Dillon. Today, Doreen Ríos is with us from San Diego, and I'm going to read a short bio for Doreen, and then hand it over to her for about 50 minutes. And then at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A, you can write a question, make a comment for Doreen, and that'll be that. So, Doreen A. Ríos is a curator, researcher, and doctoral student in art history, theory, and criticism at the University of California, San Diego. She interrogates themes of technological expropriation, tactical media, and the sociopolitical implications of digital cultures. Doreen founded MATERIA, an online platform fostering global dialogue around digital and post-digital art, with a focus on amplifying Mexican and Latin American perspectives. Through anti-materia, she cultivates collaborations among artists, curators, and scholars, advocating for critical discourse on emerging media and materialities. Her curatorial practice spans off-screen, on-screen, and hybrid spaces. From 2019 to 2021, she served as chief curator at Centro de Cultura Digital in Mexico City. Her written work on Mexican media art and media theory has been published widely, and she conducts research at Unidad de Conciencias Colectivas Terrestres, a collective she co-founded with the artist Ricardo Sierra. She's written, quote, "What does it mean to curate digital art, and how does it differ from traditional media like painting or sculpture? What unique challenges do these elusive materialities pose for curatorial practice?" She continues, "For the past 10 years, I've confronted and expanded upon these questions through a practice that explores the uncertain realm of shape-shifting digital formats." And with that, Doreen, welcome.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you everyone who has joined today for this conversation. I was not aware that this is going to be the last roundtable for this semester, so I'm honored to be closing this this phase, and looking forward also to see the upcoming program, which I encourage everyone to have a look into as well. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for the generosity, I would say, not only in the introduction of my practice, but then also in including me in such an interesting array also of professionals working within curatorial studies and curatorial practices. What I have prepared for today is a brief presentation. I have chosen two-ish exhibitions, you will see what I mean by that, that I thought were those in which I've learned the most. So these are neither the most recent nor the ones that have been, I would say, more widely covered in any way, but rather I decided to go for something that I thought, this is really where I tried to implement or to test different approaches from within a curatorial perspective. And I am more than happy and more than willing to basically just go on and share the insights on how does that look, the things that worked, also the things that didn't work, which I also think is very, very interesting and very important to socialize, right? Especially when we are trying to test and try different methodologies while working within curatorial practice. So with that in mind, I'm going to go on and share my screen.
So, Doreen, before you begin with the presentation, could you just start by telling us a bit about how you came to your curatorial practice to begin with?
Of course, that's actually my second slide, so I can just go on and click on this. Yeah, well, I actually originally I had here a little bit more of my bio, but I mean that's something that sometimes feels very rigid to really understand, like you were proposing, Stephen. How did I get here, right? How does one become a curator? That's actually one of the questions that I had when I first came across the field of curatorial practice. Um, I didn't go to art school as an undergrad. I went to architecture school instead. I am from a small city close to Mexico City, but not Mexico City, which is called Toluca. And Toluca is not necessarily one of those cities that really, that really shine from their cultural, or from their cultural events or work. Although there's a lot of very, very rich and very potent ideas that are emerging from there. So all of this to say really that I guess my way into curatorial practice was probably not something that feels linear or expected. But in many ways, I think that that is the reason why I have allowed myself also to test and explore the limits of curatorial practice in itself. So when I was in architecture school, one of the things that I realized when I started was something about architecture and the traditional ways in which we understand architecture to unfold, professionally speaking, that didn't quite sit right with the things that I wanted to pursue for my own professional career. I was an undergrad right about the time where a lot of digital tools that we use, I would say, daily, were being strongly implemented, not only within, of course, architecture and architectural practice, but then also within a broader conversation of ways of doing with technology. And by this, I mean that this was at moment in time where we were very much invested in social media, for example. There was a lot of exploration being done as well in terms of augmented reality, virtual reality, the deployment as well of devices, particularly devices of virtual reality that became much more, and therefore used within various fields, and architecture certainly not being left out of that conversation. So while I was in architecture school, one of the things that I learned was to work around software, right? Software for creative purposes, which in this case was framed by design, architectural design, but that could, in a way, work for many other things. And I was very much aware of that. So I guess that was one of the first questions that I started having while in architecture school. What else can be done with these tools? Who else is working with this type of software? Not necessarily the one that I was learning how to use, but software at large. Was there a community of artists that was interested in developing their work through these means, or what else was out there? So I guess my way into all of these conversations, apart from approaching software from a creative field, was also that at some moment in time, also perhaps around my first or second year of architecture school, was that I came across video mapping, and video mapping was the perfect merge of these two universes that I really enjoyed and cared for, right? So from on one hand, architecture, and then on the other, digital creation. Perhaps not necessarily appointed as or framed as art, but certainly something that I thought touched on the limits of what this could mean. That was something that was very interesting and very important to me back then. I learned to do video mapping while in architecture school, and many of the things that I actually ended up handing in, particularly when it came to models or renders, was a mixture of that. Was a mixture of let's say a model made out of wood, made out of cardboard, or whatever other material, but then also trying to play around with video projecting onto the model to bring it into a different dimension, right? To give it a different kind of life. But something that I also realized along the way while I was experimenting with these tools was the fact that I was not necessarily interested, let's say, in the obvious becoming as an artist myself, but rather to try and understand how these practices emerge and what kind of sensibilities and intuitions were placed from within artistic practice into the use of these tools. And that was really what started me off, not only within the curatorial practice as a field, but also specifically the use of various technological tools, creative purposes, and in this case, artistic production. At some point when after I graduated, which is also, I guess, funny to mention that by when I graduated architecture school, I still was not fully aware of how the things that I had in mind could play out actually as a professional career. I had no idea what a curator was or what a curator did. Again, I was not necessarily super close to the cultural circuit within my own community, but little by little, and I guess that this is very much through intuition, honestly, I started connecting the dots, right? I started looking into the people who developed, first off, video mapping experiences, slowly digging into other, let's say, affiliated areas such as music festivals, electronic music, and other ways of doing with technology, basically. That, I guess, opened up the door for me to understand that there was something there, something that was not only very interesting, but certainly something that really pushed me to try and explore a different approach to my own career path. So after I graduated architecture school, what happened is that I started working for an arts magazine, an arts, architecture, and design magazine. Um, they hired me really just to go and uncover the architectural section and mainly to try and translate, I guess, the architecture slang into, pieces that could circulate in a different form, particularly written form. And that's how I became acquainted with the world of the broader, let's say, artistic circuit in the context of Mexico. I was lucky enough to be able to interview and to attend many openings and to really, immerse into that universe that I was already interested on, but that I didn't really knew how to access. At some point, interestingly, and connecting to the slide that we are looking at right now, at some point I tried to, make my way into the conversation about technology within artistic practice, which was, again, something that was very much present from the very early stages within my own work, where I, tried to explore what all of this meant and how this looked like. And at some point, I started asking around, right? I started asking artists what was their relationship with technology, or how did technology became or play a role within their own practice. And one thing led to the other, right? At some point, I remember asking my former boss if if I could write a piece on this, if I could write a piece on digital art specifically. This was probably around was, well, this is certainly a field that is growing, but I don't really think there is a lot of conversation currently happening in the Mexican contemporary art circuit, which was, of course, false, since I had already seen many of these unfold, but I didn't really quite understand what he meant by that. So when I started asking around, the thing that I came across over and over and over was the fact that many of these artists felt, many of the artists working with technology, I mean, felt that there wasn't really enough exhibitions or exhibition spaces that were interested in having a conversation, a serious one at least, when it came to the kind of work that they did. This also had to do with the fact that, just like myself, many of these artists were not necessarily emerging from, going to art school and creating a series of connections through that, but rather by, going to architecture school or design school or communications school. And I guess that very deeply interconnected, interrelated, and profoundly interdisciplinary field is what eventually created this community or engaged and brought together this community of practitioners. So I remember that at some point I was like, well, as an architect, I think that that's something that I could certainly tap on, right? Like that's something that I could do. I can definitely find a way around developing space, an exhibition space that allows for all of these practices to unfold. And again, this is all to say that the first moments of my own practice where I realized that I could become a curator were very much the consequence of conversations with other folks, right? With other art professionals, mainly artists, but certainly not only artists. And I think that that gave me the space to try and understand what this could mean and how I could, in a way, immerse myself into that. And I bring antimateria into this conversation because one of the first outputs that emerged from that was antimateria as such. Around the end of 2015, I decided to basically just go on and pour all of the information, conversations, and let's say intel that I've gathered throughout that year by exchanging and talking with art professionals interested in art and technology to just go on and put this together in a sort of repository that could be accessed online, because that's certainly something that I also realized that there were many very interesting initiatives regarding art and technology, let's say as a broader field that one can find online, but those that were looking specifically into Latin American practices were not necessarily, say, as wide or as large. Um, that's really how Antimateria started. And I would argue that Antimateria as such, as a platform, as a website that you can go on and visit, was probably one of the first curatorial intuitions that I had. After that, what I did is that I obviously knew that I still needed to get much more knowledge to really try and develop my own practice as a curator. So what happened is that I went into grad school. I did a master's degree in curatorial contemporary curation, which is basically a specific field of curatorial studies. And that's really where I started to understand not only the broader history of curation, but also the role of a curator within the art circuit. And this was also around the time where not a lot of people were very fond of the figure of the curator, particularly because it was seen, at least in the Mexican context, as a figure of authority, as someone who held power, and that this power was not necessarily evenly distributed or evenly represented the variety of sensibilities and practices that were out there. But I already knew this. And I already knew this because that was exactly the kind of conversation I had with the artists that I've been interviewing, right? So I guess in a way it was a reverse way of getting into curatorial practice. I realized that that was a role I could have within this community that I really deeply wanted to be part of, that I'm still very, very passionate about. And I thought that that could be also a good opportunity for me to put into practice the knowledge that I had gathered within architecture school. Now, something that I guess is very interesting about this is that from the very beginning, I've always been much more interested in those curatorial practices that fall outside of the limits or of the boundaries of the white cube. Not only because my own practice as a curator did not start, let's say, within an institution as such, but rather it started through Antimateria and through online exhibitions and through trying to make my way into different spaces, many of which were not necessarily the traditional art institution, but then also because I guess my very own background as a curator, as an architect, allowed me to, I guess, consider that other possibilities and other spaces were also possible for curatorial practice to unfold. And that's really the reason why I chose these two exhibitions that I am about to share with you today. I would like to start off with ¿Cuánto tiempo lleva todo esto derramándose sin desbordarse? Which could translate as how much time has all of these been over spilling without overflowing? Um, and this was an exhibition very, very dear to me that I started working on in 2019, but that launched not until 2021. This was part of the exhibitions that I curated for the Digital Culture Center in Mexico City. This was about a time or around the time where many of my curatorial practice was also very much framed by the institution, in this case, the Digital Culture Center, which is a very odd type of institution in the best way possible. But it was also around the time, 2021, where a lot of the activities, as we know, were being held online due to the lockdown, but then also due to the fact that there was also a possibility there of building and connecting and developing networks among professionals that was very, very active and that became very present within the conversations in regards to particularly contemporary art. I had, of course, pretty much when I started working for the Digital Culture Center in 2018, most of the exhibitions that I curated there took place within the building in itself, within the Digital Culture Center in itself, which is not necessarily a white cube. If you go on and look that up, it's an underground space, sort of like a bunker. It has a lot of restrictions when it comes to exhibiting work. You cannot put stuff on the walls. You cannot hang very heavy stuff from the ceiling. It's a wide open space. There's not a lot of light that comes in precisely because it's underground. So it has a whole bunch of very specific characteristics that, although framed my curatorial practice within an art institution, it still was very different than a white cube space. However, in 2020, my colleague and friend Kanek Zapata and myself, after many months of trying to put this forward, we convinced the Digital Culture Center to dedicate a part of the website specifically to online exhibitions, which of course by then made a lot of sense, but then also this was something that we had both been working on for a little over a year. One of the things that we thought, and this is, I guess, a good way of introducing the exhibition, was about the fact that, of course, it's 2021, having an institution that dedicates space to online exhibitions makes sense. But at the same time, as we know, one of the things or one of the big challenges of curating online exhibitions is that it is very hard to really develop an audience for them. It is a big challenge to think around the ways in which we can engage with the screen that make the exhibition, let's say, really present, or that makes really the exhibition space in this case thoughtful of the others that are navigating it or exploring it on the other side of the screen. So that was a big question that we both had. And this is something that got paired up with a research that I had already started by then with artist Ricardo Dominguez. Ricardo Dominguez and I met in 2019, and he wanted to, go on and have a look at his archive, to work together on an archive exhibition, something that felt somewhere between a retrospective and a retrocollective exhibition. And since most of his work had been held either through digital spaces or through a hybrid materiality that merges both of them, it felt like a good opportunity for us to, in a way, make it so that the exhibition, the online exhibition space from the Digital Culture Center could become the space for this to unfold. Now, Ricardo Dominguez, to provide a little bit more context of his work, Ricardo Dominguez has always worked with collectives, right? So Ricardo is part of the Electronic Disturbance Theater. He was also part of the Critical Art Ensemble. He also put together the UC Center for Drone and Ethics, the Particle Group, a fake shop. So he has a long history and a long tradition within his own work to work with others, basically. So the reason why we came to the conclusion that we needed to pursue a retro-collective exhibition instead of a retrospective one was precisely because of that. So even though we were having a look specifically into his archive together and, putting together the memories and bits and pieces of things that occurred through his work, we always came across the fact that this was something that could have never really been done just by himself, nor was he interested in pursuing such a discourse, right? So that's where we started. What you're looking at right now is how the online exhibition looked. Since many of his work was developed from the mid 90s into the mid 2000s, or most of the work that we wanted to frame here had very peculiar aesthetic characteristics, right? It had very, very specific ways of unfolding online, and it was also very, very different to the ways in which we navigate, I guess, up to this day, the internet, basically, right? So that was one of the first things that we wanted to keep in mind, the fact that we did not want to reproduce anything to make it look more recent on one hand, but then on the other, we really wanted to dignify the histories that these artworks had and have, and how they decide to build these specific histories within the work itself. So even though this exhibition was very contained, let's say, it presented two major artworks. The first one, the one that you're looking at right now, which is FloodNet, for which we collaborated with Rhizome. Rhizome had already created an emulated version of this net art piece. This is a work from 1998 that could be described in Ariadne's words as a work of tactical poetics. It was one of the first virtual sit-ins. It was an act of electronic civil disobedience, and it was framed within the conversation that the Electronic Disturbance Theater pursued when they decided to work online. So creating networks, in this case, networks of action, of collective performance that was decentralized, that allowed for folks from many different regions to be blended together, to be together through the work. And on the other hand, we also had another iconic piece titled Transborder Immigrant Tool, la herramienta transfronteriza para inmigrantes, which is a little bit more recent. And this one was actually an artwork that we had to recreate online, because the original shape it had was in the form of a service. So this is a service that the artists developed in order to help migrants cross the Mexico-US border safely. Originally, what it was envisioned was through a geopoetic action where people could send an SMS, a message, to a specific number, and this number would locate them through the GPS of the phone that they were using. GPS being one of the most widely distributed technologies, even from very, very early devices, very early and again, very affordable devices. And what they would get in return was a message encoded as a poem, as you can see here, that helped them find safe spaces, find water along the way. This could also provide advice as to how to avoid certain detection, or to basically work around the conditions of the desert. And what we tried to do here, what we did all together with Ian Allan Paul, was to reimagine this piece now as a net art piece. So what you're looking at right now is the consequence of a series of conversations about how we could put together an online version of this piece, which, although was very highly digitally developed, it was not originally framed as such. So what we created here was an archive with poems, but we also created a sound archive with people reading the poems out loud. The poems were developed in Nahuatl and Zapotec and Spanish. So this also created a very specific way of moving and merging language through this gesture of tactical poetics as well. This second artwork, again, had a very different I guess, way of being understood through the screen, because you really get to decide how you want to navigate or how you want to experience the piece, unlike FloodNet, which is very much the reconstruction or the emulation of the piece that is now not on service anymore. However, like I said, one of the things that we had very much in mind was that we would definitely face challenges when it came to circulating or developing audiences for the online exhibition. So although we very carefully designed and developed the website that you are looking at right now, we really carefully pursued the best way in which we thought people should and could navigate the artworks. We introduced the broader archive of Ricardo by this map that you can see on screen right now. But then also, it felt like we could, of course, go on and share this broadly on our website, on our daily newsletter, on social media. We did a couple of online navigations of the exhibition as well. But there was something else that we wanted to do with this, right? This is, again, at a moment in time where, honestly, many of us didn't necessarily want to be so much online anymore. So we had to come up with other strategies to think about ways of thinking, not only of the distribution and circulation of the art of the exhibition, but thinking also about a hybrid program that could respond to the sensibilities of the artworks presented here as well. As a consequence of that, what we put together was a series of hybrid activities where you could navigate the artwork outdoors together with other folks, and to try and unpack some of the details or the specifics of the artworks that were presented on the online exhibition. What you can see here on these pictures is a couple of strategies that we used to socialize the exhibition from within, let's say, a more analog take. On one hand, we did a series of walks where we could join, where we joined in the building or the outside of the building of the Digital Culture Center. We would gather there. And then in this particular case, artist Ricardo Sierra would take us to walk across the Paseo de la Reforma, which is the street, one of the main streets in Mexico City, but also the street that the Digital Culture Center is located on. And we would walk together and we would talk about the artworks. We would stop at the specific places. So we sort of designed a guided, commented walk through the exhibition, but by actually physically being together within the space. Now, the artworks presented here are highly political. So what we created here all together with Ricardo was a space where we could strategically think where to stop, almost as if we were a group of tourists, just, gathering together and talking about the buildings and the city and the architecture. But instead, we were thinking and talking about the political infrastructures that, in a way, connected with the specific discourse of the artwork that was seen online. Now, what happened here is that in a couple of occasions, people who were not necessarily included within the activity originally ended up, joining the group and just gathering together and discussing these artworks with us. Artworks that could also be seen through the smartphone. So we could definitely go on and watch the artwork, talk about the artwork, and be present within a space that was significative for the artwork's discourse to be unpacked. So that was one of the strategies that we used. Another strategy that we used is that within the exhibition space, we had a poster that you could download and print, But we were also placing this poster that you can see here in blue. You can see it better here. It has a couple of QR codes that allow you to get into the exhibition, but it also had part of the research that Ricardo Dominguez and I put together. So we called it Hackear para Principiantes, so hacking for beginners. And we talked about collective action online, particularly in conversation of the artworks that make up the exhibition, but also the experiences that Ricardo had along the way. We printed many of the files that were available on Ricardo's archive, and we allowed people to come over, join us at the Digital Culture Center, grab a couple of them, grab whatever they thought was interesting to them and just take it with them. We encouraged everyone to go on, copy, repost, reshare any of these documents. And that was also a very interesting, very nice strategy to gather a little bit more interest around the exhibition as such. This is a larger view of the poster that we had that was ready to print. And again, we encouraged everyone to go on and circulate it. But then also we have the publication that we did all together with the exhibition. So really this was a layered structure, a layered strategy of putting together an archival research, placing that archival research in the shape of an online exhibition that again responded to the needs of the artwork itself, but also to try and think about these other elements that help put together, that help build the whole discourse around the exhibition as such and the artworks as such. Both of these elements right here were freely downloadable, and they still are on the Digital Culture Center's website. So you can go on and, try and see bits and pieces. We thought about this as layers of the exhibition. So perhaps the first layer is the exhibition in itself, but then you have all the research that was done and presented through this digital publication. Then you had the program that, in many cases gathered a lot of people together on site to create and to exchange and to expand the conversation on their works and invite them to go back into the exhibition afterwards. A second moment of this exhibition was held, say, on a more traditional sense through the actual presentation of the artworks in the Qualcomm Institute Gallery here at the University of California, San Diego. We had a symposium where Ricardo and other members of the Electronic Disturbance Theater shared their takes on the artworks, but also their own experiences on developing them and the ways in which they had unfolded through time. Funnily enough, you can see me there on one of these pictures inside of a screen, but still on the stage of the symposium. Just to, I don't know, this was a very interesting exchange where we kept thinking about what Ricardo called the screenality, right? So we would appear and reappear in different forms and materialities, but still being put together through this network a strategy of doing and making inside of the screen and outside of the screen, both curatorially speaking, but also discursively. What you can see here, again, on the other side of the screen, is basically the presentation of the artworks within the Qualcomm Institute Gallery, which is a very small space, but again, most of the work was to be seen online. So what we had here were other types of remnants that accompanied the conversation of the artworks themselves, and that made sense all together with the symposium and with the publication. And just to have another sense of how to think perhaps about the screen space as an exhibition space, I wanted to share briefly this second exhibition so that we have time for some discussion and exchange that I'm really, I'm very interested on hearing your thoughts also on this. This second exhibition is also an exhibition online, but unlike the one that I had just shown you, that in a way it originally occurs as an online exhibition, but it really touches on different bits and pieces of having and doing and making outside of the screen, right? So it's sort of recombined sort of these strategies to become one larger strategy that encompasses it all. Unlike that strategy, minimal rituals really try to insist on rethinking the online exhibition space. In this case, this was an exhibition that did not occur in the context of, let's say, a broader institution that has different qualities and different needs, but rather within an independent space called Arbeit Gallery. Arbeit Gallery also runs an online program and an offline program, and they are located in London, and they've been doing amazing work over the past 10 years. And when they invited me to create this exhibition, the first thing they told me was that they wanted to explore the connection between body, mind, and soul in relation to digital technologies. And they invited me to, go on and think with them what this could mean and how this could look like when being understood from this curatorial framework of thinking the screen, let's say, as the main element of connection. So when they invited me for this, what they mentioned was that they wanted to explore the possibilities of having an online exhibition that took the shape of a plugin, a browser extension. And in many ways, that was, very provocative, very risky as well. But it was also an interesting opportunity to consider what other forms, other than websites, could online exhibitions take. This was by far one of the most experimental ones that I have approached, and also by far one of the ones that required a deeper curatorial eye, if you will. So what I did for this exhibition was that I invited six artists. So I invited Cesar Chirinos, Kira Sonorica, I invited Mónica Nepote, I invited Vika Pacheco, Flavia Visconte, Sebastián Mira, and Ricardo Sierra for this show. And what we did is that I chose from already existing work that they had, but also keeping in mind that I wanted to really make a case for thinking about the different types of formats that you can have when working with the digital materiality. So I had still image, I had video, I had text, I had a moving image, sound pieces as well, and I really wanted to play around with that. So the way in which we envisioned these being put together was through a browser extension that allowed for you, once installed, to have a choreography of pop-up screens emerge at a specific moment on the day over the course of 28 days. That was the vision, let's say. So while working with the programmers, what I told them was that if we were thinking and talking about what a ritual could mean and what a minimal ritual could look like, then we should think about the conditions in which these screens emerge, right? And to really try and work around something that felt unexpected and perhaps rescue some of the ways in which we used to navigate the internet and that we don't anymore, for whatever the reason might be. So that was the first thing that about a choreography was also thinking about or already thinking about an algorithm, right? So we were going back and forth in this conversation of what an algorithm is, how an algorithm makes itself present, and what other analogies for an algorithm we could find. So by exploring this, that's actually the way in which a ritual or the idea of rituals emerged originally. Because of course, as we were trying to unpack the notion of the algorithm or the basic form of the algorithm, we kept going back into the idea of, well, it's a series of instructions, right? An algorithm is a series of instructions that does this and that and has many outputs and could be reactivated. And therefore, an algorithm can, of course, very well be a line of code or a piece of code, but it can very well be a choreography, and it can very well be a recipe, and it can very well be the rules of a game, of a manual of assembly, or a ritual, right? That appear or activate as such It is under the repetition of a specific set of instructions or rules or passages that the ritual emerges. So with that in mind is that we thought to bring that back to the idea of the pop-up screens as something that was activated, without you necessarily having to specifically undergo a series of elements, but to really try and think about the screen as that space, the online, particularly the online experience that allows us to connect with others unknowingly, through these encounters with digital content, and particularly in this case through artwork. So that's what we had in mind, and what we did is that I chose artworks that would appear or that would be presented, daily over the course, as I mentioned, 28 days, which means that not any of these works would present twice, so it would not repeat. So it would also attest to something or to go against something that was very common on online exhibitions, which is, the idea that you can always go back and see the work. That was not the case here. If you missed the work, then you missed it. There was no going back. There was no reappearing of the work, not under these conditions. So that's how the coordination of this choreography emerged. So we started, with a specific series of rituals written by Monica, where a specific set of works would manifest on screen. They would appear in a specific place within the screen, as you can see here. They would have different relationships among themselves, but also they would be introduced with a slight difference in time. So we had a couple of seconds of difference in which the screens would pop up. So it would definitely manifest as if something was, I guess, building on its own within your screen. And then the rituals, all of them were available to be read in Spanish and in English as well. All of this to just go on and try and think what this minimal ritual was, what this pause on the screen meant, right? And how that, in a way, tried to trace back or to bring back the notion of an online exhibition that plays with a counterintuitive way of navigating the internet, a counterintuitive way of understanding digital content, but then at the same time, something that brings a different type of sensibility into the mix, because you know that you are connected. You know that there's other people at this specific moment of the day that are also having this experience with you, even if you cannot see them, even if you cannot touch or go across or interact with them. There is something that makes you be together somehow. And especially since we're thinking about a ritual, right? So we have rituals to listen to the voices. We have rituals to see the sprouts coming out of the screen. We are invited into this choreography that is now our own choreography, one that is collective, one that is networked, and then also one over which we have no control on, which was also something that we wanted to pursue when thinking about how we wanted this exhibition to unfold. We didn't want this exhibition as something that had to be clicked and navigated, but rather something that appeared, that made itself present under a specific set of conditions, right? Just to follow of the ritual in itself. Of course, this meant that downloading a browser extension is not necessarily one of the most, let's say, approachable ways of developing an online show. But again, that we could think around that limitation and to try and build other ways of being together by inviting people to either download the browser extension in someone else's computer and share these series of choreographies with them, or in many cases, what I did with some of my students, for example, is that we got together to go on and install the browser extension in the university's computers, for example, because we really wanted to have that, to bring back that sense of wonder, right? To really have something that feels unexpected, something that you were not looking for, but perhaps something that can give you. Oh, I think that I froze for a second.
Yes, we lost you for a second.
I was already on my last slide. Happy to move into comments and questions. So we didn't miss anything. That was the last slide.
Okay. So I ask all of you in the audience, do you have any questions that you can put in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen? Let's give it a moment. I certainly have plenty, but here's someone. Hello from Puerto Rico. Very cool to hear about the community aspect of moving digital art in real life. I don't know, any comment about that?
Yeah, that was, especially with the first exhibition, that was something that we really wanted to make a case for. That thinking about an online exhibition doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be an isolated experience, that it could have a series of strategies around it, and that perhaps if building an audience online seems harder and harder, particularly when it comes to social media and circulating information through social media, there are many other ways in which we can do that. So I think that, yeah, we really wanted to pursue that connection.
Okay. Catherine Rochester. Is it possible to summarize the operations, gestures, or characteristics of online exhibitions? Could these be articulated as fundamental to online exhibitions as opposed to physical ones? I guess I'm wondering if there's a sort of manifesto or set of principles that you have found helpful while making online exhibitions.
Well, I haven't found or have, let's say, a manifesto as such, but I have certainly spent a lot of time online. Sometime back, I wrote an essay that has to do with the typologies of online exhibitions that I have found over time. Not to say that these are the only ones that exist, but it was an exercise, writing it was an exercise for me to try and make a case for understanding what types of online exhibitions I have experienced and what characteristics they have, how they differ to one another. And sometimes it's not, I would say, it's not so much about how they are different to those that happen, let's say, outside of the screen, but rather how they blend or merge or provide a different set of elements to expand what happens outside of the screen. That's how I would frame it. But generally speaking, what I found was basically exhibitions that are navigated through hyperlinks, where the hyperlink and being able to connect and go from website to website is central to the navigation. There are others that are, I would say probably the most seen ones out there in the past couple of years at least are those that recreate a three-dimensional space where you can navigate on the form and shape of an avatar, which of course has its own series of conditions that allow, I don't know, for certain concealment or a different relationship with the body as well. Apps, obviously, all other kind of efforts that happen within social media for sure, practices that you can see unfolding. For instance, an example that I found very interesting is that of Artboard by the Whitney Museum of American Art. And not only the online exhibitions that they have, but they also have this specific program that is titled Sunrise Sunset, where they commission works that, let's say, parasitate or populate the museum's website at a specific moment of the day. So I guess it's really more about, yeah, I don't know, like going into a whole bunch of them until you figure out, the possibilities that they have. That's what I would say that has helped me at least.
It sounds like you're the one to write a manual, so to speak. So the next question, browser extensions can be considered controversial by operating systems and blocked by antivirus software. Did you give workarounds to your audience? Could the work be seen by the browser extensions in Linux?
Yeah, this one was a very, very specific, very peculiar one. So the programmers that I collaborated with created two browser extensions, one for Chrome and one for Firefox, which meant that obviously any other browser was not a, let's say, could not access this exhibition or cannot download this exhibition. We didn't come across a lot of, I guess, issues when it came to antivirus because once you installed the extension, it asked for certain permissions. What we did do is that in order to share and socialize how the exhibition worked, we made a written manual and we made a series of videos explaining how it works. How you could, how you could get a hold of them, where you should download it, how could you download it, and some advice for how it worked. But generally speaking, it was pretty much a series of pop-up screens. So as long as you were able to give access to the extension, specifically the browser, to have pop-up screens showing, that should be okay. All of the artwork was already, let's say, saved online. So what you were opening was basically just a series of websites. But yes, of course, blocking pop-up screens is one of the main features of many antivirus and even many browsers like Firefox, for example. But we try to work around that by, on the, let's say, on the technical side by asking for permission of the browser to pursue certain kind of activity, but then also by giving out instructions for the audience.
Okay, there are two more questions. During the time these exhibitions were developed, we saw the rise and fall of NFTs. Does this have any bearing on future online exhibits?
Well, I think that these are two different, although interconnected universes. For sure, we can see how a growing interest in NFTs created, let's say, a community that was much more interested in developing and even, navigating online exhibitions. But then at the same time, online exhibitions as such have been out there since day one of the internet, just like NetArt has. So I would say that, of course, this has changed the ways in which we interact or understand or navigate online. But I wouldn't necessarily say that this is something that changes radically when it comes to the, I guess, new framework under which NFTs are currently at. Although something that I would definitely mention is that I would argue that it was by far much more, we saw much more radical change on online exhibitions with the rise of social media and the fall of various different social media platforms than what we have seen with NFTs. Once that we stopped navigating, let's say organically navigating the internet or navigating the internet through looking up stuff online, and rather we navigated the internet through social media, that's where I would say radically changed our relationship with it. So I would say that I would frame it through a different technology or set of technologies, I would say, but still, it's every change allows for something else to emerge. That's also true for online exhibitions.
Last, so Ricardo's retrospective was perhaps controversial in its time. Would it be possible still now?
Probably, I mean, we had it happen in Mexico, so it was a very different environment. I would say that it would depend on who is hosting it and how it is being hosted. Even in Mexico in 2021, when we presented the exhibition, it was controversial. Of course, these artworks, again, are deeply, highly political. They have always been controversial from the very beginning. So regardless on where you reframe them, they will still carry that with them. I would say that perhaps nowadays within the US, within a US institution, it might for sure be way harder to try and create something like this. I would argue, though, that if we were to present this in a context such as that of Mexico, I would say that it would still very much be possible as long as the hosting institution is not one that is, I guess, located in the US. Perhaps it can still happen.
Okay, with that, thank you so much, Doreen. Thanks to the audience. And you and I, Doreen, will now switch to the student session.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay, bye.